swims by and nods at them. And he says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the fish, two little fish, they swim on, keep swimming where they were swimming, and after a little while they turn to each other and they say, "What the hell is water?" Now, our panel today is talking about water. And it's talking about water because normal, the idea of normal, is the water that we swim in, each of us little fishies, every single day. It's what people think of as appropriate or acceptable. All people have a normal. All of us have a normal. It's what we do without really stopping to think about it. It's our default position. But how things become normal, how it is that we get to the point of thinking something is acceptable, is not really something we tend to think about very often. And so the aim of this session is to bring it a little bit into our awareness. We tend not to think about it because it surrounds us all the time. And its influence kind of becomes a bit invisible. So our water, our normal, is often ignored because it seems a bit transparent and it's a little bit difficult to specify. Hard to nail, hard to kind of point a finger and say, that is what I think, and this is why I think it. So the question is, whether you know what your normal is, and I think probably more importantly, if you're able to use it to your advantage. So we've got 4 speakers here today who are going to help us think about our comfortable and maybe our uncomfortable, and to try and challenge us to live life a little bit more consciously. They're going to do that by asking the question or posing the idea of the new normal, how we can disrupt it, and other key questions. And at the end, each of these panelists is going to leave you with a question, something which for them, at a particular moment, when they started thinking about what it means to have what their water is, what their normal is, maybe grounded them, or maybe would ground them, would make them think more consciously about the way in which they live. Now, each panelist is going to speak for 7 minutes. At the end of that time, there's going to be a bit of a moderated conversation. Sometimes it's going to be me asking a question, sometimes it's going to be you asking questions, and it's going to flow from what it is that comes out of their points. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing. I'm going to basically point in fact, I might even ask you guys to introduce yourselves in a sentence or two before you launch in. We've got Aaron, Rafa, Nat, and Joel, and Aaron's going to take it away.
Going first, hey, awesome. I'm just shaking off the morning because I just had a big program design call with the school in Queensland, so I'm shaking off the morning. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Play with me. So I wrote a whole bunch of stuff, but I think I'm just going to riff. I'm just going to riff and talk from here if I can. So here's to the crazy ones. The misfits, you rebels, troublemakers, round pegs in square holes. Here's to those of you who think differently. You're not fond of rules. Now, we can question the change makers. You can vilify them, you can gratify them, you can quote them, you can disagree with them, but what you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They move the human race forward. And while so many of you might see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the only ones who ever have. Steve Jobs. Heard that quote before? Put your hand up. Etch it into your skin. Etch it in. This idea of normal. Normal. Look to the root of it. Look at the Latin root of the word normal, and all you see is the word common or typical. You don't see the word, this is how it's always been. You don't see the word, this is how it always should be. And you certainly don't see, and it doesn't mean that this normal is right. That it brings out the best in people. That it creates a world that is just and fair and real and equal. That's not the definition of normal. It's just common and it's just typical. That's it. Especially if it's not right, if the normal is not right and doesn't serve our best as human beings in the world we live in, well then I want to be abnormal. Place me in that category every day of the week. And I've wanted to kind of be in that category since the day I was born. For some reason, I questioned normal early on. Don't know why. But for some reason, I wanted to know why we did things and questioned just because. Questioned, well, we just always have. Question the fact that you're in an education system that when I was in year 11, your age, I was wondering why I couldn't take my book into the exam to quote from, when in the real world that never ever happens. There's nowhere in the real world since that moment have I had to memorise quotes from a book without having it there. Even that quote I just memorised earlier, I could have just pulled it out. I question, is the education system actually getting the best out of me when I was in school? I remember thinking that. My answer is absolutely not, unequivocally no. It's not getting the most out of the potential of every single one of you. And I questioned at a young age. Had to. How can we not? And that's the question that I'm thinking about. How can we not question? How can you not question the way in which this world operates? How can you not be outraged at the unequal society we live in? At this society we see as typical and common, it's a story. It's a story we created in the West, and it's a story that serves up as a moment in time. Hasn't always been, won't always be. It's just a moment in time in a story that's typical and common. We imagined it. So what is the story I want to live in? What is the world, the story I want to live through for these days that I walk on this earth? That's the story that I'm interested in painting a picture of. And to give you an example of how you should question, I got asked to go into a prison a few years ago, Barwon Prison. It's just on the way to Geelong. It's on the way to Geelong. I got asked to go and visit this prison. And there was a wonderful woman in this department, in the inside of this prison, running a restorative justice department inside the prison. And there are members who have credited these prison mates who have done some pretty terrible things, very violent things. But her department inside this prison is a restorative system. So they live, they have jobs, they get paid, and it's whereas they would otherwise be out in the back, locked away in cells. And it's working brilliantly. The Australian people around Australia are looking at her particular model of justice and thinking, wow, this is working. She questioned the norm. And some man was in there with her that very day and put up his hand and said, look, I understand that people are really violent. These boys have done some really violent things. You know, how do they become so violent? She looked at him like he was abnormal. She looked at him and she said, how are we not violent? How do our boys not become violent? Look around us. Look at every advertisement or TV show or game or movie. It's guns, it's violence all around us. That's the norm we live in. The typical is a violent society, if you look around. Makes me think of body image. Body image on the rise, body image issues on the rise, anxiety on the rise. How does that happen? How is this happening? Look around us. Look at the films, look at our marketing, look at our advertisements. That's not the normal that I want to be a part of. We live in an extreme world. So my question for you is, what's your story of normal? What are you going to question around you? And when you've done that, you've found your internal right. And the right, the normal that I'm asking you to find, is not that's always been, is not what exists right now, it's what is right, what serves a better world. What is that inside you? And then, how do you pursue it with courage and conviction? And do it truly for your days on this earth. Don't ignore it. Don't shape it. Live it. Question, and live it. That'll do it.
That reminds me of your wedding speech.
Did it?
Thank you. That's very good. So, much more personal, this one. Normal is getting up when the sun is up and sleeping when it's dark. Normal is eating 3 meals a day after waking at midday and in the evening. Normal is spending nights with your partner and being free when your friends are free to hang out. Normal is having dinner with your parents or your in-laws once a week on Fridays. Normal is having energy to do all of these things most of the time. Normal is the 8-hour workday that we celebrate every year on Labor Day. 8 hours work, 8 hours rest, 8 hours play. 8 hours of work per day, 5 days a week, followed by 2 days off. The value of all these very simple fixtures of life is hard to see until you go without them. That's one quick and easy way to disrupt the status quo. Take yourself out of time. I'm a paramedic. I work for an emergency service that needs to be available at all hours, every day of the year. Working outside of the normal 9 to 5 is known as shift work, and being a shift worker has taught me more about the normal rhythm of life, self-care, and my values than any other experience I've engaged in. Working for Ambulance Victoria has meant that for the last 6 years, my life has been defined by an 8-day rotating roster, while the lives of most of the people who matter to me remain on a 7-day rotation, also known as a week. It means that while I work on average 40 hours a week, roughly, these hours are distributed unevenly. 10-hour day shifts, 12-hour afternoon shifts, 14-hour night shifts. Our work is organised this way for very important reasons, and I'm not complaining. One huge benefit is that my weekend is made up of 3 days instead of 2. But a major downside is that the other components of the 8-hour workday, 8 hours rest, 8 hours play, are also distributed unevenly. The harshest implication of this simple reality is that weird start and finish times make for weird sleep, and weird sleep often means less sleep. And life gets strange and difficult and lonely when you multiply less sleep across months and then years. It does so by stealth, so that by the time you're really struggling, you think what you're feeling is normal. You don't even notice you're feeling it. Preventing this situation is a major challenge. I realised this after I'd been a paramedic for about 2 years. Circumstances brought me to live with my grandfather for 3 weeks straight. We did everything on Sabba's schedule. We'd spend the day looking after his wife, who was unwell. In the evening, he'd pour me a brandy and we'd watch some opera. We'd go to sleep, always before midnight. And at 9 a.m. in the morning, every single day, he'd bang on my door and take me out for breakfast. And the cycle would start again. When I got home from this time away, I found myself waking up early in the morning without alarm, feeling ready to get out of bed. Not only had I not felt that way in a while, I had forgotten completely that it was possible to feel that way. And with this extra energy, I came to realise something else. I was lonely. I was awake enough now to realise how much I missed seeing my friends and family every week. So I learned something else about myself. I need to connect with the people who matter to me in order to feel good. I value personal connection very, very highly. Pardon the terrible pun, but this experience was a huge wake-up call for me. I realised that on so many levels, shift work could take me away from automatic access to things that were good for me. Before I was a shift worker, I didn't have to plan to sleep well. It just happened. I didn't have to weigh up and had energy to spend talking to someone I loved. If I wasn't free to attend a social event, it was because I was probably already going to another social event. I didn't have to check if I was working and then decide whether or not it was worth trying to swap a shift and then actually try and get out of work. When that's what it takes to get to a party, you work out pretty quickly that most parties aren't that interesting, especially if you're tired. And once you've declined enough invitations, people stop inviting you. Shabbat dinners feel very different when you can only go to half of them, and before half of those dinners, you've just finished work, again, completely exhausted. I realised that what I already knew in general terms, that shift work will impact your personal life, could very specifically be boiled down to 2 main factors: energy and access. Shift work by definition reduces the time available to connect with people, because often your leisure times and even sleep times don't overlap. But I realise that the quality of that time that remains can vary. If I can keep myself well rested, then that time is good. If I can't, then I'm missing out on connecting with people even when I'm with them.
I realised that access to people I love is really important to me and good for me, that I need to take time to schedule it if that's what it takes to make it happen. To an extent, this is what happens to adults in general, who have very few spaces where they can incidentally hang out with people. Shift work just adds a layer of complexity to this reality. I realised that the rhythm of a day, a week, a year, is either way more significant than mere lifestyle, or that for some reason the word lifestyle for me just feels more trivial than it actually is. In order to connect with people, it's important to feel fresh and rested when they feel fresh and rested, to feel like relaxing when they feel like relaxing. And that feeling connected, generally, is nourishing in a way that isn't far off from eating pretty good meals on most days. Because my work-rest play rhythm is structured differently to most people's, I have to very deliberately find points of access to locate times when our rhythms meet up. Or I have to create that time, because while the ambulance world has its own rhythm, and it's a good rhythm to stay in touch with, it's worth disrupting to remain connected to my personal life. I guess my key question after all this learning by doing is, what are the good things in your life that currently happen just by themselves, and how you maintain them when that is no longer the case?
It's the hot stand. Hello everyone, some of you saw me recently in our workshop. Welcome back. My name is Joel. I work for an organisation called the Man Cave. The Man Cave runs preventive mental health and emotional intelligence programs for young boys in high schools. And ever since I started working for the Man Cave, I used to be a lawyer, corporate lawyer for 2 years, and I started working there at the Man Cave about 6 months ago. And it occurred to me recently that over the last 6 months, I've been using a word more times than I've used it in 29 years before that. And that word that I've been using really frequently in the last 6 months is the word permission. And like the word permission is just like, I used when I was a kid, like, are you allowed to like do this thing, like go on the computer after 8 p.m. or like watch Seinfeld 100 episodes in a row. All this stuff was just about, and I didn't really understand that, but in the last 6 months I realized that the norms that society lives by are often governed by whether or not we give each other permission to not be normal. The only way that we'll ever break from normal is when one person firstly does that themselves, and by doing that, they give permission for other people to do that. And I want to give you an example of that from one of the workshops that we run with our boys. And the reason we run these workshops is because of some harrowing statistics, like suicide's a leading cause of death for young men under the age of 44 in Australia. 1 in 5 men suffer from anxiety or depression before the age of 18. 95% of family violence is committed by men. There's a lot of things where men are harming themselves and harming others, and we're trying to get there at a preventative end to work with boys in year 7, 8, 9 to stop it before it starts happening. The way we do that is by helping boys take off the mask. Boys come to school every day with a mask or like a suit of armour, and the only way they're going to survive is if they keep that armour on strong, they act tough, they pretend that they want chicks, even if they don't, they talk about booze, they talk about gaming, even if they don't necessarily like it. And so the purpose of the workshop is to help them deconstruct that image, redefine it, and decide what kind of men they actually want to be. And this helps men in their life, the women in their life. So one story from one of our workshops about permission was when after we'd gone through a full day and the boys felt really safe, like they had permission to share about who they really were, one of the boys said, I have something to share. This was an exercise where on one side they wrote about what's on their mask on the outside, fun, tough, love sport, all that stuff on the outside of my mask, and what's on the inside. Show us a little bit about what's really behind your personal mask. And one of the boys said, behind my mask is I'm actually bisexual, and no one in this year level knows that. And when people make jokes about being a fag or a pussy, that really offends me. It makes me feel terrible about myself because that's who I am. And we had a conversation about that, and he had an opportunity to tell the people who had actually said that to him what impact that had on his life. They committed to being a different type of person in the future. They committed to being a proper friend, to not using that kind of language in the future, and he felt safer as a result and felt he had permission to finally be who he was. That was only part one of the story. In doing that, 5 minutes later, one of the teachers, who was in their mid-30s at the time, said, I actually have something to say. I want to share something as well. Interesting, okay. Comes out and says, actually, I'm bisexual. And I've never told anyone in this school because I thought that that wouldn't be acceptable in this school environment. But after seeing that young boy speak so confidently and openly about what he truly believes, who he is, his identity, I now have permission to be who I want to be. And that completely changed the culture of that year level. For the rest of the year, they felt close to that teacher, they got closer to one another. And all of that was about breaking the norm. Like, it's normal to behave like I'm a certain type of gender identity or sexual orientation, and that boy challenged that norm and gave permission to other people to do the same. So we've been exploring what it means to give permission to each other, and it all happens through courage. The courage of just stepping in and saying, actually, here's a little bit about myself. Another person's like, whoa, I didn't realise I could do that. You've given me permission to do the same. And that's how norms change. And I'd like to give you another personal example of actually how, in our organisation, how we give permission to each other every week to be ourselves. And this is something that, like, if you did it in a law firm, it would just like freak out all of society. There was no chance anyone would ever do this. Every single day in our workplace, before the day starts, the team gets together and we do two things. We do a check-in and we do a clearing round. And the check-in is really, when it comes to your turn to do the check-in, you just say, how am I feeling right now? You don't have to tell stories about the past or whatever, or things that are happening, but just in order for me to come properly to work and be like a real human, I want an opportunity to say, actually, I'm kind of struggling right now. I gave an example of check-in a couple of weeks ago where I shared with my colleagues first thing in the morning that my nana had been put in an old age home, a Jewish care, and that was a real shock for me because we'd always had conversations and shared stories, and I was afraid that now that she was entering sort of the phase of dementia, that we wouldn't have any more opportunities to really just to connect properly because she just wasn't as present as she used to be. And that was on my mind as I was starting work. And in our workplace, that is completely acceptable just to bring that and be like, I'm going to be a bit off today. And I hope that's okay. Everyone's like, absolutely fine. And I was given that permission to be that way. So I didn't have to hide that and be like, oh, just close it off, get through work for 8 hours, and then at home I'll be sad and anxious or whatever. I can just be that here, and that's okay because we want to be full humans here. And then the clearing round is about if there's anything that's standing between me and you, me and my colleague, something that's like, I've had this story about you, or you really annoyed me in this way in the last day or week, and I've been holding on to it. I've been holding on to like resentment or some sort of feeling where I feel distant from you. Now's an opportunity, and you have permission to say, actually, that behaviour that you did had that impact on me. I'd like to restore it, and now's an opportunity to do so. And we'll just like do those clearing rounds like every week, and it's a way for us to foster and build relationships with one another. And the other person will commit to acting better in the future. I'll commit to whatever I commit to, and there's new opportunities there. So both of those stories about the boy in school and our workplace are really all about permission and the norm. It's really abnormal in a workplace to share about who you are and what you're feeling in that moment. And it's abnormal to confront people about things that are pissing you off about them, and to do so in a way which isn't like fuck you, you're ruining my life, and I hate all the stuff you do to me, but more like, actually I want to share this with you because I want to have a better relationship with you. That's the purpose of sharing this. I want to have a better relationship with you, and this is how we're going to do it. So I think the question I don't know how much time I have or whatever, but cool. The question I want to leave with everybody, two questions actually, is about the mask. Is that everyone really wears a mask of some sort? We spend our entire life trying to take off the full mask. And so my question to you is, are there little ways in which every day, every week, you can sort of take a little bit of your mask off, just a little bit with different people in your life to try and build that connection with them? And also permission. How can you find ways to give permission to other people by being the first person to have a little bit of courage and say, hey, here's a little bit about myself, and to give that person permission to be like, oh, great, it's okay now, I can also be a bit more of myself with you. And the question to you is how to build permission in society in order to break down norms and build connection with one another.
Hi, my name is Natalie Rathner, and I'm going to start by just sharing a story about myself. It's a story that some of you might remember. I shared it at a Year 12 assembly last year. And it's just about my life after school. So I graduated from Mount Scopus College in 2009. I'm old. Youngest here. And I went on Hubbo Schnat, and when I came back from Schnat, I decided to study physiotherapy. Now, the reason I did physio, honestly couldn't tell you. I never, ever wanted to do it. But I didn't know what I wanted to do, and that was the problem. And I felt like, looking back now at my whole schooling and my whole childhood, I was told that there is this idea, you have to have this idea of what you want to get to in your life, this career goal, right? You want to be this person, you want to get here. And then there's this linear trajectory that gets you there, right? That's what I was told. But the truth is that for some people, that works. But for a lot of us, that linear trajectory isn't going to work. We might not know what that, golden nugget place is, and I certainly didn't. I certainly still don't. My life has been way more about moving this, right? Backtracking this way, that way, this way, that way. But at that point, I didn't know that. I didn't have permission to take those different routes. So I went down the linear track and I started studying physio. And I talk about these long drives to university because my campus was about an hour away. And every single day I would wake up and I would get in my car and I would drive an hour to Bandura, which is very far, and I would sit for 8 hours and I would learn physio stuff and I would get back in my car and I would drive back home. And in those long drives, I sat there and I just started thinking to myself, where am I going? You know, what am I doing? Why am I driving? And I would sit there and I'd watch the kilometres kind of tick up on the dashboard. What's it called? Thank you. I'd watch it kind of tick up and I would just feel like I was going further and further away from where I actually wanted to be going, but I didn't know how to pull that car over and get out because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I'm sure there are people here that can relate. And it took me 2 years. It took me 2 years to get to the point where I felt confident to just turn that car around and drive in a different direction, even though I didn't know where that direction would take me. And when I decided to stop studying physio, which again, it took 2 years, but hard, I have since then had all these amazing opportunities that I never would have had or seen if I just went down that linear path. So I went and I lived in New York, I worked at a startup, I'm now studying an MBA in social impact, and I work in Jewish community looking at social innovation and philanthropy and funding. And these are all things that if I look back, they all happened serendipitously. They all happened by chance encounters, and a lot of hard work. And there were so many times when I went down some certain path and I backtracked because I didn't want to go there, or I failed, or I turned a different way, but it doesn't matter. And when I look at a lot of my friends who have taken that career trajectory and are very, very happy, that's great. But all of my friends that have kind of woven and swung are the ones that are doing the things that they really, really love and are really, really, really aligned to who they are. So, 2 things I want to talk about. The first is, how do you know who your best self is, right? So how do you swerve and move and drive your car towards your best self if you don't know what that career goal is? And that takes what I like to say is radical self-awareness. So it's the ability to look back at yourself and reflect. And there are certain structures that you can put in place to do this. So for example, I was part of Hubbo, that was a really good structure. But even today, I'm still trying to figure out who is this best version of myself, right? Who is this best version of myself? And I want to share this exercise I did a couple of months ago because I highly recommend it. I emailed 10 people that I'm close with, a mix of friends, mentors, family, co-workers, and I asked them one question. I asked them to describe a time when they had seen me thrive. And I got all these answers back, and I collated it into one document, and I managed to paint this really clear picture of myself when I'm thriving, right? And if you think about yourself now, you know what that is. There were no surprises there. You know when you thrive. You know what makes you thrive. But now I have this really vivid image of myself thriving, and that's what I'm working towards. So in the last couple of months, I've kind of started saying to myself, how do I strive to thrive, you know? Am I aligned to thrive? Am I aligned to my best self? So any structure that you can put in place to kind of get this idea of who your best self is kind of the starting point. The second thing that's really important is this idea of testing and learning. It's the swerving on the path to get to your best self. Like I said, kind of tried a million different things. Since finishing school, I've had over a dozen jobs. I've lived in 3 different countries. I've surrounded myself with different people, and really tried to put myself in different situations where I can test what works and what doesn't work. And it's okay to test things. It's okay to not have that linear line, but to really go and try different things. And something that's really amazing about our generation is that we're so hyper-connected and have such access to knowledge that if you want to do an internship at a cool startup, you can just Google them, find a number, and call them, right? You can do that, so do it. Really, put yourself out there to experiment and create those experiments for yourself. Just another story, when I moved to New York, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea, obviously, but I see that's the whole story. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And a few days in, I went to this circus show. And I left the circus show, and I was like, oh my God, I found my people. These people are amazing. I want in. Yeah, I know. And I got home that night and I was on such a high, and I opened my laptop and I looked up House of Yes, which is what it was called, and I found the info email address. And on this high, I put it in my, in a new email, and I emailed them saying like, yes, I want in, I found my people, I've moved to New York, I want in. And I was expecting an email back that said, cool, come and sweep our floors and we'll give you free tickets. Instead, I ended up going in for a meeting and they hired me to produce a 5,000 person warehouse party in Brooklyn for Halloween. Now, if you told me when I was, 17 or 18 that I was going to work in nightlife and be planning this warehouse party in Brooklyn, I would have said absolutely no way. That doesn't fit with a resume. Like, that doesn't look good on a resume, let alone fit with it. And it's not part of my idea of what I'm allowed to be. But if I look back on that time, that is one of the most valuable career experiences I've had, because I got to work with the most creative people for 6 months, the most creative people in the world, and everything has value. So that was just an example, right, of like how do you create these experiments to grow and figure out what you want and not be embarrassed to try new things. Time? Cool. So the question that I will pose is, how do you organize your life around your best self? How do you set yourself up to thrive? And keep your eye on that.
That was phenomenal. I prepared a bunch of questions, so I'm going to ignore those. I'm just going to read back the stuff that we kind of got left with, and I'm going to get you to kind of tweak it if I get it wrong. I reckon Aaron's major thing was, what is your right? Get in touch with what is your right and live it. Find a way. How do you find a way to live it with courage and conviction?
Yeah.
I think Rafael was talking more about connection, and I feel like your question, Rafael, was something around how do you find, what are the good things that happen by accident, that kind of happen by themselves, and how do you find ways to make sure they keep happening when life kind of goes out of kilter? Yeah. Joel was talking about permission, and his two questions were, one, are there little things that help you, little things that you can do to just put the crack in the mask, take a little bit of that, chip a bit of the wall off? And also, how do we allow and permit others purposefully to do the same?
Yep.
Yeah. And, lucky last, Nat was talking about radical self-awareness, which is a whole other level of getting to know yourself and pitching it as your best self, the best version of you, and finding ways to set that as the target. Set your best self as the target and find different markers along the way and make sure that they make a connect the dot kind of picture rather than a straight line. Okay, about that. So, who wants to start us off?
I'll respond a little bit to what you were saying, Joel. I liked a lot of what you said about talking about permission and how as we're advancing, I think it's good as well to try and make it easier, give more permission to each other to do things that we should be allowed to do according to our perceptions of rightness. But I was also thinking that a lot of the time in our lives, we're not actually going to get that permission. The example that I was thinking about was a lot of us in this room are self-identified Zionists, and a lot of us are going to go to university. And a lot of us, if we asked the university, would say, oh, do we have permission to be Zionists here? A lot of people would say no, I'm guessing. Like, a lot of people will probably not give permission for that. So I'm thinking, I think it's also just as good, it's not impossible to be who you want to be. So I want to be a Zionist at university and anywhere I am, even if I don't get that permission. And I know it's very hard to do that, and I agree with you that it's a lot better to get that permission if, not get permission to do things that are universally, like, I've seen as wrong, like stealing. But if you do think it's something that's really right and it's really what you're standing for, that's not like illegal, then I would hope that it's also possible that we can try to get people to feel strong to be what they want to be and think what they want to think, even if they're not going to get that permission, because sadly, sometimes they won't. If that makes sense. But I also think we should work to make that permission more possible.
I think that's awesome. Joel, do you want to respond? Can I just reframe that in a general way by saying, and to all of you, what challenges come up for you personally? Because you've all, in your own ways, had to either deal with being outside of the sync of what is normal, or had to directly and like just grab the full by the horns and challenge what's normal. What difficulties come up for you when you're completely out of permission that Zeb's talking about? Like, how do you face a world that doesn't always rest up to you and go, yeah, here's your okay?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's easier said than done, but obviously courage is what's required to do something when you don't have permission, right? Like if someone gives you permission, less courage is required to do it because they let you do it, so they let you just do it. So in an ideal world, we all have the courage to know who we are, have the radical self-awareness that Nat was talking about, and be like, I'm going to take the courageous step, I'm going to do my thing, I'm going to be openly Zionist, I'm going to share my views, provided it's not illegal, etc. But the reality is that courage takes a very long time to cultivate. And so, yeah, in the normal course of events, we need to each give each other micro amounts of permission in order to come out with that courage. And the second thing I would say is the permission front I was talking about was also specifically one-on-one. It's also good societal, like I'm going to be an open Zionist in a societal way, but also it's especially about, I think all social change happens in really micro individual human moments. And so that permission stuff is really about like the one-on-one, like how do I get permission from you to be who I really am in a one-on-one environment. Like on a university campus, that's almost like a formulaic thing as well, of like how do I get permissions, like put up a poster with the Israeli flag and things like that. So the one-on-one stuff is the hardest.
Does anyone else kind of want to respond to how tricky it is to take on the normal?
For sure. I'd like to say that I find it incredibly challenging, and it's my biggest personal struggle. My biggest fear is that I'm going to end up, doing the normal and drifting, right? Just drifting along without taking the boat and steering it myself. What I do to help me is surround myself with people that will hold me accountable to doing something different. So will actually question me, is this what you really want to be doing? Is this aligned with yourself? And by surrounding myself with those people, I find that it helps keep me on track.
A little bit of nodding there.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
I think I'd like to say that it's, I think the project of making our society and our own personal spaces safer for us to be who we are is a really important project, because the world is not a safe place. The world is not safe for you to go. The world will try and push you around to make you, because it's convenient most of the time. It's just easier if everyone's like, oh, okay, we all agree, just everyone knows what to talk about, no one's going to like it's simple. So if you give the rest of the world space to make their lives simple, like the world will take that space. So it's important, and that goes for, politics is one domain, but like how you dress, what you eat, how you spend your time, how you spend your money, those are all other domains. But if everyone, what is convenient for society is not necessarily what's best for you. And once you've worked out what's best for you, then the courage you need to cultivate is the courage to say, well, actually, I know myself, I know what's good for me, I don't need to, it's not my problem that it's in for me. And when you have enough self-assurance to just own that, you don't need, it's a very gentle pushback. You don't have to be aggressive about it, and you don't have to be loud about it. Generally speaking, once people recognise they can't actually push you to be something else because it's easy for them, then they stop pushing.
I was just wondering if any of you have advice on how to manage things when they don't necessarily fit together, like what makes you happy or what you really believe that you want is not what, let's say, makes maybe your parents happy or your friends think, that's not what's going to make you happy, but you strongly believe, I want to go, I don't know, climb Mount Everest, I'm going to do it, and your parents are like, no, you're going to die. There's no way that you can do that. And you're like, no, I strongly believe I can do this. How do you make everything fit so you get what's best for you and everyone else is supporting you, and it all goes together?
I'll kick off. My dad basically talked to me for a year when I started studying ambulance. So I had to grapple with that for a long time. And I'll say first of all, a lot of the time when people in your life, like people who are close to you and know you and aren't deeply want what's best for you, when they're making you feel ashamed of something you've chosen to do, it's probably not because they're trying to control you. It's probably because they see it at odds with what they think is best for you. And they don't know you as well as you know yourself, but it's worth reflecting on why do they think that there might be something in it. It's not enough to just live by what people want for you, but if you assume that people who love you want what's best for you, then their emotional reactions to your decisions is useful information, often, not often. Sometimes, depends on how conversant the people who love you are, you can talk this stuff through. It takes work to find the words, and that's a challenge, but you can talk about it. But sometimes you can't, and you just have to live the example, and it's going to be 10 years down the track when you can be like, hey, look, I knew myself, I picked a good direction, I worked at it, and I'm in a good place. And the people who love you and want what's best for you will see that, and will be able to say, okay, wasn't convinced initially, but the proof is in the pudding.
I would say test your assumptions. So a lot of the time we assume that our parents want certain things for us or our friends want certain things for us. And what I found is a lot of them are assumptions. So even doing small tests, small experiments to see if there's pushback. For example, coming to your family and saying, hey, I want to go and live in a commune in the Amazon, if that's what you want. And just putting it out there and seeing what they say. And doing small tests that kind of check whether what you think they think that they want for you is true or not. For example, I thought that my dad would say to me when I was in year 11, you're not allowed to study nursing, it's not good enough. Came back to me when I was 25 and living in New York, and I said, hey, should I take this job in nightlife or should I take this job in marketing? I got offered. He was the one that turned around and said, do the fun one. So, I think that we have assumptions about what people want for us, but ultimately they just want us to be happy, and you can test it in small and safe ways to see if that's true or not.
Your name?
Leora.
Leora. My thoughts, Leora, is find your why, and if you can communicate that really well to the people, if they love you, you can communicate that really well. Obviously, I want to go climb Mount Everest. Why do you want to do that? If you can communicate that you want to live your life in this certain way and this is what's meaningful to you, I think so many of us just get frustrated and share what we want to do. But if you can get to the core of the why and you can speak to that in the people around you, it shifts things. It's more authentic. So how do you communicate what's really valuable for you? Hopefully, people around you who love you can open their ears and listen to that and see through the what you're doing and just, I get you, I can see where you want to go.
I've got to say, so great, I like that you both said that because I've got something that's contrasting which also might be useful. So together this will be like a perfect package for you and anyone else who has the same question. A couple of years ago, I realised this amazing thing, and I only met it on Carlisle Street because I was having coffee and Jews walked by and I listened to what they're saying. And two people were having a conversation about why do I need to care about what that person thinks. They were just talking about this thing, whatever it was. And the person responded and says, you're not responsible for somebody else's feelings. It's like, oh my God, that sounds amazing and profound. What does it mean? I thought about it for a couple of years, I think, and I really live by it now, is that broadly speaking, yes, we need to be sensitive towards one another, like don't be rude to each other, don't offend one another. But beyond that, if somebody else has a feeling about your life, that's okay. That's their feeling though. That's not your feeling. So you take it on board, and this is just what I do with now to this day, obviously, my parents, Jewish parents, are always giving me their opinions and their feelings about my choices in life. And in the past, I would butt heads because I took responsibility. I wanted to own their feeling. But now I'm just I listen, thank you so much for sharing that, and I absolutely accept that that's your feeling. This is my feeling. And that's it. This is my feeling, this is my life, and we can both have separate feelings and separate life. I don't need to own yours, you don't need to own mine, and we'll just go our separate ways. That's it. And it really works.
doing it, yeah, live your life.
It's unbelievable. And the second thing I have to say is, I mentioned this in the workshop I did with some of you recently. There's this blog I read recently called The Regrets of the Dying. It's a full book about a woman who worked in palliative care for a long time, and she looked at all the regrets of everyone who were about to die. The number one thing was that I led my life according to what other people thought I should be, instead of the life that I wanted. That was the number one regret of every person she saw. Thousands of people she had treated before they died. You don't want to have that regret.
My friends are already having quarter-life crisis. Everyone has half-life, but the questioning is getting quicker. So my friends in their late 20s are saying, hold on a second, Joel's left law. That's a quarter-life crisis.
Early life.
Early life, quarter of the way, 25, 26. But my friends are already they're questioning 5, 6, 7 years into their professions, what the hell have I been doing for the last 6, 7 years? And the crossroads are happening, which is really good, it's happening earlier. Let's bring it earlier, and you don't even have to ask that question, have a crisis. If you're asking that question now, and you're hunting the dreams early, and shaking off the expectations early.
Just to carry on that car metaphor, for me it's about learning to listen to that inner GPS, so first knowing where it is that I want to go, and then having the confidence to get behind the wheel and drive it.
So you all have, I'm sure, have histories where you defy normality, and I'm sure there are a lot of us sitting here who agree with that. So I guess my question is if there's such objection to such a strict standard of normality, why is it still so prevalent, and can a world exist where such rigid social structures don't control us as much as they do? Great question.
In defense of normality, I think there's lots of norms that exist for practical reasons. So those reasons might get spun up, and they might not always be relevant, but they're not. It's not like there's a central planning committee of society who sit down and go, how can we oppress people with norms? Norms evolve because they work for a long period of time, and then they persist even when they don't get useful. 3 meals a day, pretty much every couple on earth eats 3 meals a day, and that's frankly, that's how often I'm hungry. That's how often it's when it takes a long time to prepare food. In some cultures, it still takes 6 hours to create it. So you can't have 6 meals a day. You just can't do it. It's not possible. There's certain norms that are tied to websites and stuff. Where is the water? How hard is the water to get? Whenever I discover a practical reason for something, I get very happy and okay. It's not total bullshit. And repeat the second part of your question. How do we need? I think and so again, it affects the norms. I think that it's very lonely. It's very lonely. I talked about how I got disconnected from my personal life, but in ambulance land, because everyone does have their rotation, you have to come on and off with the same people. And if you're not following that pattern, then you don't have good connections with people out there either. And it's the whole debate in the workplace about do we break that pattern? It's if you break that, then you actually break cohesion of the workplace, and we actually need to really deep level trust each other, because there are times where it's more or less a gesture or a single word is going to go, this is not safe to leave, so this patient's going to die really quickly. So there's a value in having a norm. And then it's also really important to go, that actually sometimes crushes people and affects people in other ways. And so the norm can't be set in stone. It has to be something we recognize serves a function, can't be simple.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with that. I'll talk about innovation for a second, because the single biggest killer to innovation is this attitude that this is the way things have always been done. So to answer your question, it is hard to function when our institutions are trying to produce an idea of normal. But I think, for all of us here, we're actually working to change those institutions, whether it's a mindset of how we raise our boys, or and all the other work that we're doing, how to look at the Jewish community in a lens that is innovative and grow it, and not this is, what community looks like and given to you. So I would say that there is space for a world without it. We just have to work to build it.
We're actually going to have to cut the questions. Sorry, just because we're running out of time for new messages.